Hello guys and welcome to my video lecture. So we are going to continue with the revision lecture series. Okay, so last time we completed with DNA replication. Now we are obviously revising the chapter molecular basis of inheritance. Okay, so today we are going to start with Michelson and Stahl experiment. Alright, so let's start with that. So it's a very easy experiment, and this experiment proved that the DNA replication is semi-conservative in nature. Okay, so what is the meaning of semi-conservative? So semi-conservative means that when one DNA molecule replicates and gives rise to two daughter DNA molecules, then in each of those daughter DNA molecules one strand is retained from the parent, okay, and the other strand is new. So 50% DNA in the daughter DNA is parent and 50% is new, so it is called as semi-conservative because 50% is conserved. Okay, so this they proved through an experiment, and since they both did the experiment, it is called as Michelson and Stahl experiment. Now for this experiment, basically the experiment or the technique used was called as equilibrium density gradient centrifugation. Okay, so this is the name of the technique. I have already explained the technique in the video lecture. So basically this is a technique in which everybody knows what centrifugation is, right? So by using the centrifugal force, you separate the mixture. The heaviest material lies towards the bottom of the centrifuge tube, the lightest one will be towards the top. Now what is equilibrium density gradient? So in this method, basically a liquid is used. Okay, now in this experiment, the liquid which was used was 6 molar cesium chloride. So I'll write that down because that is very important. So Michelson and Stahl use this cesium chloride 6 molar. Okay, now what happens to the cesium chloride is when you put it in a centrifuge tube and you allow that mixture to get centrifuged, then this cesium chloride, it forms gradients. Okay, so I will do one thing. I'll just draw a tube over here. So just this is your original centrifuge tube, correct? And in that tube is just imagine that this is your cesium chloride, correct? This is before centrifugation, and after centrifugation what is going to happen is that cesium chloride is going to basically form layers. Okay, so this will be, sorry, so this will be the top layer, this will be the middle layer, this will be, so there will be 3 distinct layers which will be formed. And why will these layers be formed? That is because the cesium chloride mixture, when it is undergoing centrifugation, that centrifugal force basically separates the components based on their densities. So this lowest part will be the heaviest, this middle part will be medium in weight, and this will be the lightest part. So your cesium chloride gets distinct gradients. Okay, these levels are also called as gradients. So now what we can do is, basically in DNA related studies, you can put a DNA into this mixture of cesium chloride. So what you do is you take cesium chloride in a centrifuge tube, you add DNA to it, you allow that mixture to get centrifuged, and what will happen is that DNA will get stable in one of these 3 layers depending on what the density of the DNA is. Okay, for example, suppose if this separation, now suppose this separation, the density of this portion is say 6 grams per centimeter cube. Okay, the density of this is say 5 grams per centimeter cube, correct? And let us assume that the topmost layer has 3 grams per centimeter cubes density. The density will obviously decrease after centrifugation. So if you add the DNA, that DNA is also getting centrifuged, and it will become stable. After centrifugation, it will become stable in one of these 3 layers. So if I am using this green color for DNA, and if this green colored DNA is stable in this middle layer, that means the density of the DNA is also 5 grams per centimeter cube. Are you getting? So that is why you can basically compare the DNAs based on their densities, and that is why this method used is called as equilibrium density gradient. Equilibrium means that after centrifugation, those layers, those gradients are at equilibrium, they are at rest, they are not again going to mix unless you physically mix them. Okay, is this clear? So that is called equilibrium density gradient centrifugation. This method was used. Now we come to the actual part of the experiment. So there were two mediums which were used, okay, and the growth mediums, they were N15 and N14 mediums. Now this experiment was done on the DNA obtained from the bacterium Escherichia coli. Okay, so the DNA obtained from E. coli was used for this experiment, and they were grown in two types of mediums, correct? They were grown in N15 medium and they were grown in N14 mediums. These are the two isotopes. N15 is the heavy isotope of nitrogen, and you know that during replication obviously nucleotides are required. So what will happen is the DNA growing in that particular medium will take up that nitrogen, because nitrogen is present in nitrogen base, correct? So now first step is, what happens is, so in the first step, what Messelson and Stahl did was that they took the DNA from E. coli, okay, and they grew that DNA in N. So I'm sorry, they didn't take the DNA out, they took the E. coli and they grew the E. coli. So okay, should actually change this off. The DNA was not removed from the E. coli, so the E. coli were grown in two mediums, N14 medium and N15 medium, and obviously inside the E. coli are present the DNA. So first step of this experiment is E. coli cells were grown in N14 medium. Okay, so what happened was that whenever these E. coli cells were growing and when they were replicating, the DNA when they were replicating inside the E. coli, they took up this N14 and they got labeled with this N14. So are you understanding? We are basically using radioactive probes kind of a thing to label them. So just imagine that N14 medium is taken up by that E. coli when its DNA is getting replicated, and later on what they did was they took the DNA sample from that E. coli, they centrifuged it in 6 molar cesium chloride, and what they got was a tube which was something like this. So now I am showing a slant tube indicating that it has been centrifuged. Okay, this is the centrifuge tube, this is the bottom, this is the top part, and what they got was they got a band somewhere over here towards the surface. So you can say that this is the N14 band, correct, because the DNA was cultured in N14 medium. Then what they did was they took another different batch of E. coli, not the same one over here. They took another batch, and that E. coli they grew it in N15 medium. Okay, and what happened was, now when E. coli are grown in N15, they will take up the N15, and then again the same thing, the DNA was removed from E. coli, it was subjected to centrifugation, and after centrifugation the tube showed. So these bands are basically the bands where the DNA is present. Okay, so it is that gradient in which the DNA is present and it is at equilibrium, that is the band. So when they did this, so I'm going to show a different band for N15, different color for N15, and I'm going to show green color. So this band was somewhere near the bottom, but that is common sense because N15 is a heavy isotope of nitrogen. Obviously the DNA will be heavier, so it will be towards the bottom after centrifugation. Now the third step was that this same E. coli which was grown in N15, now that same E. coli, so that is why I am showing this arrow over here, that same E. coli is now transferred to N14. So please remember, this is not a new batch of E. coli taken. See, in these first two steps separate E. coli were grown in separate media. But in this third step, E. coli from N15, which is already replicated in N15, now that E. coli is removed and it is kept in N14 medium. Now, when they did that, they allowed the E. coli to replicate, the DNA to replicate, and once that was done, they took out the DNA and again subjected it to centrifugation. And what do you think would have happened? So they got a third colored band. So I'm going to show this density with this color, and this was the band which was obtained. So this band is an intermediate band between the N14 band and between the N15 band. Okay, and this same thing, if you want to see representation wise, then we can also show it like this, that, so see, let us assume that this is your DNA of the E. coli which is grown in N15 medium, correct? And let us assume that this is the DNA of the E. coli grown in N14 medium. So I'll write down, this is the DNA double stranded I'm showing, okay, and this is the DNA grown in N15 medium. Now what happens is, so these are the first two steps, individual E. coli cells are grown, correct? Now what they did was, this E. coli grown in N15, it was transferred to N14. So when this N15 grown E. coli is transferred to N14, at that time when DNA replication takes place, the DNA takes the nucleotides, okay, but the nucleotides are containing N, not N15, they are containing N14, because from N15 now the E. coli have been transferred to N14. So I'm going to write down over here, transfer to N14 medium, and because they have been transferred to N14 medium, when this DNA will replicate in the N14 medium, what is going to happen is, one of the parent strands is going to be conserved, and the new strand which is going to form, that is going to have N14 medium. So I'm going to use a green color. So this is what they will appear like. The new strands which are constructed after replication, they will have N14, the original ones will have N15. So this is showing semi-conservative replication, 50% of the parent is conserved. Now suppose if this second generation is still kept in N14 and further allowed to replicate, then what is going to happen? Very simple. So in this step I'm going to write down, further kept in N14 medium. So now again what is going to happen is, so this, the parents will be conserved. So this is one strand of the parent, okay, this is one strand of the parent. Similarly here both the strands will be conserved. So I hope you are getting my point. Here one strand will be conserved, so it will be this, one strand will be conserved this, and the new strand which will be formed will all have N14, so they will all be obviously green. Are you understanding this? So when they basically got this bands, so this is the generation which is shown over here. So if you see this band which is intermediate band, so these are the DNA which are having both, they are having N14 also, okay, and they are having N15 also, and that is why that band is intermediate between N14 and N15, and that is represented over here, this generation. It is having one strand N15, one strand N14. So please remember, with this experiment they proved that DNA replication is semi-conservative. You need to remember the chemical used, 6 molar cesium chloride 2, okay. It itself gets divided into the gradients when it is subjected to centrifugation. Clear? So I hope this experiment is clear, okay. Now the next part that we are going to revise for today is going to be transcription, okay. So before we start with transcription, what is central dogma? Okay, so central dogma is basically also called as summarization of protein synthesis. So the summarization of protein synthesis can be written like this, that you have got DNA, okay, you are constructing an mRNA from that DNA, okay, you can also construct an rRNA or tRNA, and that mRNA, from that you are forming polypeptide, okay. and polypeptides will form protein. So I'm writing that down over here. This process over here is called as transcription. Okay, and this process over here is called as translation. And this entire equation which I have written now is called as the central dogma of protein synthesis. This is the summary of protein synthesis. So in protein synthesis we basically learn transcription and translation. Okay, now a separate central dogma was given for retroviruses. Okay, if you remember that. And what happens in retroviruses is there is something that is called as reverse transcription. I have already made a video on viruses, and RNA viruses or retroviruses, they undergo reverse transcription by using the enzyme reverse transcriptase, so that RNA gets converted into DNA. So in that central dogma, one additional thing that you need to add is that this mRNA gets converted into DNA through reverse transcription. Okay, and this equation is also called as central dogma for retroviruses. Is this clear? Okay, so is the central dogma clear? Now should we start with transcription? Okay, so transcription is very important from the exam point of view, so let us start with that. Now first of all, what is a transcription unit? Okay, a transcription unit is basically the unit which undergoes transcription. And what is the structure? So let me draw the structure once again. First we draw the double stranded DNA, correct? This strand 5' to 3', the other strand 3' to 5', correct? They are anti-parallel. Now the strand which is this one 5 to 3, which is having 3' towards the right hand side, this is also called as the coding strand. This strand doesn't take part in transcription, it is not doing anything. And this strand is also called as the sense strand. Whereas this other strand which is having 5' towards the right hand side, it is called as the template strand, correct? Or it is also called as the anti-sense strand. Alright, now this region, okay, this region which is towards the 5' end of the coding strand, this region is called as the upstream region, whereas the region which is towards the 3' end of the coding strand is called as the downstream region. Similarly, this region is again upstream and this region is again downstream. So I hope this upstream and downstream is clear. The 5' end of the coding strand or the 3' end of the template strand is the upstream region. 3' end of the coding strand or 5' end of the template strand is called downstream. Okay, now what is present in the upstream region? The upstream region has got an area which is also called as the promoter region. The downstream area has a region also called as the terminator region. Okay, and between these two areas are present the structural genes or structural gene, depending on how many genes are present. Okay, so this structure is called as your transcription unit. So I'm going to write down over here, this is your transcription unit. Is this clear? We have already studied this. This is just a revision, so I'm just going to go through this very quickly. I hope this is clear. Okay, why is this strand called as the coding strand or the sense strand? Because the sequence on this strand is going to be exactly the sequence on the mRNA. The only difference is in this strand there will be 2 T and on the mRNA there will be U. Apart from that, the sequence on the coding or the sense strand is the same. Why is this called as the template or antisense? This is called template because we are using this strand to create the mRNA, so it is called as a template or the parent. And antisense because the sequence on this template is opposite or complementary to the sequence on the mRNA. Clear? So I hope this upstream promoter, downstream terminator is clear. Now coming to the structural genes part, structural genes are also called as cistrons, so I hope you have not forgotten that. Another name for a structural gene is a cistron. Okay, and because of that there are two words, monocistronic and polycistronic. What is the difference between monocistronic and polycistronic? So basically monocistronic genes are the genes in which only one structural gene is present, and polycistronic means there are more than one structural genes present. Okay, normally monocistronic are eukaryotes, so I'm going to write them over here. So eukaryotes are monocistronic, whereas prokaryotes are polycistronic. Okay, so what happens in monocistronic organisms is one gene gives rise to one mRNA, gives rise to one protein, and in case of polycistronic organisms, more than one gene, structural genes, give rise to one mRNA, which give rise to the number of proteins which are equal to the number of structural genes. Is this clear? Okay, now let us start with the actual process of transcription. Okay, so I hope this part is clear. Let me rub this off. Alright, so we will begin with our double-stranded DNA over here. Alright, this will be your coding strand 5' to 3'. This will be your template, so I'm writing over here coding strand. This is your template strand. Okay, this region is the promoter, this region is the terminator. I hope you remember that. Okay, if you want I will just highlight it. So this is your promoter, this is your terminator, this is upstream, this is downstream. Now what happens is, the first step is that near this promoter area there are proteins or there are factors which are called as the sigma factors. So I'm going to write over here. Okay, this sigma factor are basically the proteins which are present near the P site, whereas this T site has got proteins or factors which are called as rho factors. So sigma and rho both are Greek symbols normally used in physics, but over here these denote two types of proteins. Okay, so sigma factor is present near the promoter region, rho factor is present near the terminator region. Now these sigma factors give a message to an enzyme which is going to start this transcription process. Okay, now what is transcription? You want to create an RNA from DNA, correct? So what is the name of the enzyme which does that? So the name of the enzyme is DNA dependent RNA polymerase. So I'm going to write it down over here. Now why is the name given in this fashion? DNA dependent means you are creating a DNA from, you are creating an RNA from this DNA, so it is DNA dependent. And RNA polymerase, what are you forming? You are forming an RNA, so it is RNA polymerase. Okay, suppose if you want to form a DNA from RNA, then it will be RNA dependent DNA polymerase. Okay, and if you want to form a DNA from DNA, it will be DNA dependent DNA polymerase, which is DNA polymerase. Similarly, RNA to RNA, RNA dependent RNA polymerase, that is RNA polymerase. Okay, so now I am just going to use this short form RNA polymerase, but please remember it is DNA dependent RNA polymerase. Okay, so what is going to happen is that these sigma factors, they will tell or they will guide this DNA dependent RNA polymerase towards this site. Okay, so the sigma factor, its job is to take that RNA polymerase and bring it to the promoter region. So the next step that is going to happen is, let us show that with purple color, and as soon as the RNA polymerase attaches, what happens is the bonds between the two strands break. So this is 5' to 3', this is 3' to 5', and this over here is your DNA dependent RNA polymerase, which is bound to the promoter region. Okay, and so what is the specialty of this RNA polymerase is that it breaks the bonds in the area where it is attached to the DNA molecule. It breaks the bond between the coding and the template strand. Now what it does is it takes complementary nucleotides from the nucleoplasm. All this is happening in the nucleus. The nucleotides are present, you know, they are DNTP, DATP, DGTP, DCTP and DTTP. So it will take up the nucleotides and they will be taken according to the nature of this template strand. So if the sequence on this template strand is AGC, then the complementary nucleotides taken will be U, C and G. Okay, please remember you are going to build an mRNA from this, so don't consider T, consider U. So if the sequence suppose over here is AAA, then the mRNA formed will be UUU. Is this clear? So what happens is, how is this mRNA formed? So I am going to show the mRNA with a yellow color. So one end of the mRNA is attached to the DNA dependent RNA polymerase and the other end is obviously forming the complementary bonds with this template strand. Is this clear? Now what happens is, as soon as the bonding over here is complete, this RNA polymerase will move towards the right hand side. Okay, so it will slightly move ahead, and so we can show that. So again, this is your coding strand, this is your template strand, and now that RNA polymerase, which is your DNA dependent RNA polymerase, has moved ahead, correct? And so we can show it over here. So what happens is, as soon as that RNA polymerase moves ahead, again the complementary bonds between the coding and the template strand are again established. So what happens is, now that mRNA which was formed, it is still attached over here. So now it breaks off from the template because the template is now bound to coding strand. So the mRNA cannot be attached to the template strand. So this which was bounded, it is now hanging. Whereas now, since the RNA polymerase is present over here, the bonds between these two have been broken. So now it will be attached to the template strand over here. So whatever will be the sequence on the template, the sequence on mRNA will be complementary, and again the same rule attached to the RNA polymerase. So are you getting this? And what will be the polarity of the mRNA? The polarity of the mRNA is same as that of the coding strand. So this end is going to be 5 prime, this end is going to be 3 prime. So I hope now you must be getting the point why the sequence on mRNA and coding strand is the same, except that in coding there is T and in mRNA there is U. Okay, and finally what we can show is, in the last step, the RNA polymerase has moved towards the last part of the DNA molecule, which is the terminator region. Okay, and as you know, in the terminator region are present rho factors, and what rho factors do is, rho factors tell the DNA dependent RNA polymerase that transcription is over, now your job is done, and they basically throw off the RNA polymerase from the DNA structure. Okay, so as soon as the RNA polymerase reaches over here, now again, since it has come over here, these two strands will be again bonded and the mRNA will be hanging loose again. So this is your mRNA, again it is bound over here, and the last part is bound over here, 5 prime 3 prime. Okay, so that, let me write down coding template, correct? So as soon as the RNA polymerase reaches the terminator area, the rho factor tells it that transcription is over, and what happens is, because of that RNA polymerase basically falls off from the DNA double helix, and the next part which I am going to show is your RNA polymerase, and to that is attached your mRNA, correct? And the next part is going to be that these two will be separated. So this is your mRNA, which is 5 prime to 3 prime, and your enzyme has separated. Okay, so this is your mRNA which is ready. It is a crude mRNA. Okay, it is a mixture of unwanted substances also. So we are going to see what is going to happen next, but I hope you have understood what happens as soon as the RNA polymerase reaches terminator. The Rho factor signals it to move out of the DNA because transcription is over. Okay, and because of that the RNA polymerase and the mRNA fall off, and finally the mRNA separates and you have the mRNA. Is this clear? Now this mRNA which is formed, it is given various names. So one of the names given to this is, it is also called as heterogeneous RNA. Heterogeneous means that it is having many different things in it, that is why it is heterogeneous. Or it is also called as crude mRNA because it is having many impurities. Or it is also called as a primary transcript. So all these words mean the same thing. Okay, that is, it is a newly formed mRNA. Okay, now to make this newly formed mRNA or this heterogeneous RNA or this primary transcript purified, there are 3 steps that we have to follow, and those 3 steps are also called as post transcriptional analysis. Okay, so what we are going to do over here is, I am going to rub this off. Okay, and I am going to show you post transcriptional analysis or post transcriptional changes. So what happens after transcription? So now you have your crude mRNA or your heterogeneous mRNA or your primary transcript ready. Now this primary transcript has got 2 types of regions. Okay, so I'm going to show these orange regions in between. I hope you can see them. Okay, and there are these yellow regions also. Now this crude mRNA which is formed, it is made up of 2 types of regions. Okay, some of the areas are called as exons. All the orange areas are exons, and the yellow areas I can write them as introns. Okay, so there are 2 types of areas, introns and exons. They are alternate to each other. Now see, for translation, because this mRNA is going to now move out of from the nucleus and going to the cytoplasm, and along with ribosomes and tRNA, translation is going to occur. For translation you require exons. Okay, exons have all the coding areas. Okay, introns do not have coding areas, so introns are not required for translation. So why do you want to unnecessarily increase the length of the mRNA? So the first step in post transcriptional analysis or changes is that those unwanted introns are removed, and that step is called as splicing. So in splicing, what happens is, this orange areas which I have shown over here, those orange areas are removed. Okay, and they are removed by special type of enzymes called as spliceosomes. It is not given in the book, but please remember. So they are somewhat like nuclease enzymes which cut the DNA. That is what they're doing. And so in splicing, basically the introns are removed and the remaining exons are all joined. So now we are having a shorter heterogeneous RNA. Is this clear? So unwanted introns are removed in splicing. Actually I made a mistake over here. I should have shown introns in orange color, so I will just rub this off. Okay, and this exons in yellow color. Correct, and we have removed the introns in splicing, so only the exons are remaining. So this is the first step called as splicing, in which unwanted introns are removed because these are non-coding areas and they are not required for translation. The next step after splicing is called as capping. Okay, and in this step around the 5 prime end of the mRNA, a special type of nucleotide is attached which is called as methyl guanosine triphosphate. It is written like this, MG+P. Okay, now why is this methyl guanosine triphosphate attached to the 5 prime end of this primary transcript or this crude mRNA or this heterogeneous RNA? See, in translation what happens is the ribosomes attach to the 5 prime end of the mRNA. So the ribosome needs to know which end of the mRNA is 5 prime. So this methyl guanosine triphosphate acts like a marker and it tells the ribosomes that this end is the 5 prime end. Okay, and since the translation starts at 5 prime, that area is considered as the head, and since translation ends at 3 prime, that area is considered as the tail. Since we are adding this nucleotide at the 5 prime end, it is also called as capping. Okay, and after capping, the last step in post-transcriptional changes is called as tailing, and here we are going to basically label the 3 prime end. Okay, so this is your 5 prime end, this is your 3 prime end, and in tailing, let me show the methyl guanosine triphosphate over here, and in tailing we basically add adenine residues to the 3 prime end. So it is also called as polyadenylation, or it is also called as poly A tail. Poly means many, so many adenine residues are attached. Now this mRNA which is having only exons, which is having methyl guanosine triphosphate at its 5 prime end and which is having a poly A tail at its 3 prime end, this is called a mature mRNA. So now I can write down mRNA for this. Now it is no longer a heterogeneous RNA or a crude mRNA or a primary transcript. Okay, so I hope the difference between hnRNA and mRNA is clear, or the difference between primary transcript and mRNA is clear. The earlier ones all are having crude mixtures, and those mixtures are removed through this post transcriptional changes, and you are having this purified mRNA. Now what is going to happen is, this purified mRNA which is present inside the nucleus, that is going to go outside the nucleus into the cytoplasm, and there it is going to undergo translation. Okay, so is this part clear? So with that we have completed revising transcription. Okay, and our last part for today is going to be the genetic code. So basically that part doesn't require revision, but I'm just going to take up the properties of genetic code. So first of all, what is the genetic code? Genetic code is basically a table which shows all the different codons, correct, and for which amino acids those codons code, correct. How many codons are present? 64 different codons are present, and they code for how many amino acids? They code for 20 different amino acids, correct. So that chart is there. Now please remember, out of those 64 codons, only 61 code for amino acids. Okay, and they are all called as sense codons. Whereas 3 codons, they do not code for any amino acid, and they are called as non-sense codons. Okay, so if you remember the structure of the mRNA, you know the stop codons UAA, UGA, UAG, all those 3 are nonsense codons. Apart from them, all the other codons which are present are called as sense codons. Okay, and those 61 codons will form how many amino acids? They will form 20 amino acids. Okay, so this part is clear. Now the next part is who discovered this genetic code. So genetic code was discovered by many people. Okay, one among them was Hargobind Khurana, an Indian scientist. So many people discovered the genetic code. Okay, now what are some of the properties of the genetic code, which is very, very important, and it is asked a lot in theory exams. Write down the characteristics or write down the properties of the genetic code. So let us write down the characteristics. Okay, so the last part in today's revision lecture is going to be characteristics of the genetic code. Okay, now You can write down these properties or characteristics in any order that you remember. So the first one that I remember is that genetic code is commaless. What do you mean by commaless? Very simple. When you are writing down the codons, you do not put a comma in between. For example, if you are writing AUG, you do not write A comma U comma G. So it is commaless. Okay, that is the first characteristic. Second is it is universal. What do you mean by universal? So the codons which code for all the amino acids, they are the same in all organisms. So all the organisms follow the same genetic code. So separate charts are not there for different organisms. That same chart is there for all the organisms. For example, if GGG codon, it codes for an amino acid glycine in humans, then it is going to code for glycine in all the other organisms. Okay, if that organism produces glycine. Is this clear? So it is universal. Third is it is non-ambiguous. What do you mean by non-ambiguous? So I had told you, please remember this point. Non-ambiguous means it is fairly straightforward. It means that one codon can form only one amino acid. One type of codon can form only one type of amino acid. This point is called as non-ambiguous genetic code. The fourth point is literally the opposite of this, and it says that genetic code is degenerate. Okay, so what do you mean by degeneracy or degenerate genetic code? That means that one amino acid can be coded by more than one codon. Okay, glycine is coded by 4 codons, so that is called as degeneracy. But GGG can code only for glycine, that is called as non-ambiguous nature of the genetic code. I hope this is clear. What are some other characteristics? So some of them which I can remember is they have a start and stop signal. So you know that there is a start codon AUG, there is a stop codon. There are 3 different types of stop codons, UAA, UGA, UAG. Okay, so those are present in the genetic code. What else can we remember? So in degeneracy of the genetic code, they have explained wobble hypothesis. So what is wobble hypothesis? So see, there are 64 codons and there are 20 amino acids. So how many tRNAs will be present? Because one tRNA can carry only one amino acid. So there are only 20 tRNAs. So how will the tRNA bind to the mRNA if there are only 20? So one tRNA, some of them can bind to 4 different codons. Okay, so for example, suppose, so everybody knows the anticodon on the tRNA is complementary to the codon on the mRNA. Suppose if the tRNA has sequence, let us write down the sequence. Suppose the T transfer RNA has sequence on the anticodon AAA, then it should bind to the codon on the mRNA which is UUU, correct? However, what if it can bind to UUA also, it can bind to UUG also, and it can bind to UUC also on the mRNA. Now this is called as degeneracy, or it is also called as wobble hypothesis, because when the bonds are formed, the first 2 nucleotides are forming bonds, but in these 3 examples, A and A, they cannot form bonds. Similarly, A and G cannot form bonds, A and C cannot form bonds, but still the first 2 bonds are enough to keep the structure more or less stabilized. It is called wobble because slightly the molecule becomes unstable because the third base is not bounded by a hydrogen bond, but still it remains intact. So that is called wobble hypothesis. It was given by Crick. Okay, so this example is given in degeneracy of the genetic code. Okay, then what other characteristics? So these are some of the main characteristics that I remember. Okay, start and stop signal, it is commaless, it is universal, it is non-ambiguous, it is degenerate. There might be 2 or 3 characteristics which I may not be writing over here, but these are the important characteristics. Is this clear? So our revision lecture for today has ended, and in the next revision lecture I'm going to start with translation, and I'm also going to cover lac operon in that. Okay, so that is it for today. Okay, now normally the characteristics question, they normally ask that please write down any 3 or any 5 characteristics, so you don't need to remember all of them, but please remember these main points: this non-ambiguous nature of the genetic code, the degeneracy of the genetic code. Okay, it is commaless. Okay, you don't write commas. Universal. Okay, then there is a, okay, I forgot one of the points. It has got a definite polarity. So what is definite polarity? Definite polarity means there is one end which is 5 prime, there is another end which is 3 prime. Okay, so that is called as definite polarity. Any other points that you can remember? I think I've covered almost all the points. Okay, so that is the end of today's revision lecture. If you have any doubts, you can contact me. Okay, and I hope you are all seeing this lecture after studying the actual part. If you are not studying the actual part and directly viewing these lectures, then this is not going to help you, because I am just revising, I am brushing through this subject. Okay, I'm not explaining everything in detail. I'm thinking that you have already read and you are coming for these lectures, so please do that. Okay, thank you.